Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tuzinkowicz as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Well, welcome back to Boosting Business Value. We have a really special and spooky and fun episode prepared for you right now. The timing of us recording this episode is prior to Halloween, and this is going to be about M&A nightmares. So jumping straight in, at least for those of you who are still new to this Boosting Business Value podcast, I'm David Gruder, the business life cycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is wonderful co-host Jason Tuzinkowicz, Blue Sky's Chief Operating Officer. And joining us for this episode is Blue Sky's founder and CEO, Troy Tucker. So thanks for being with us, Troy.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be scary when you got Troy on the line. So, yeah, we thought it'd be fun to have an annual recurring Halloween episode where we talk about the things that keep M&A advisors up at night with cold sweats and that could terrify a business owner as they start to consider going into an M&A exit transaction. So just a few disclaimers. These stories are true. Do not try them at home. All the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And with that, and the guilty, exactly. And with that, Doctor, take it away.
Sure. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to share with you 4 horror stories, and I'll be introducing each one with its title. Then the story will be told in a brief way, and then the 3 of us are going to have a little mini discussion about the story before moving on to the next one. So that's how we're going to be doing this particular episode. And we're going to start off with a story that Jason's going to tell us called A Kidnapping in the Midwest.
All right. Thank you so much. So it was a sultry October day. No, just kidding. So here's the story. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of give you the story, and then we'll all try to dissect it and give you some ideas of potential solutions and ways to mitigate the damage of these nightmare stories so that you don't end up where our protagonists end up. And so this very first story, I was representing a company in the Midwest, really nice company. They had a nice growth trajectory. They had a good, solid business. It was 2 owners, good guys, liked them a lot. We found a great buyer and we got into due diligence. We all liked the terms. They were going to sell at a reasonable value. They had 30% of the transaction value held back in a seller's financing with a decent interest rate. So all was going well. We cruised through due diligence. The financials looked fine, negotiated the definitive agreement. Everybody was on the same page. And we got into the last week of due diligence. And in the last week of due diligence, that's when the buyer starts to get to meet the staff that will be his new team. And it was at this point that we realized there was a massive skeleton in the closet that the owners, the sellers, my clients, were trying desperately to keep out of my and the buyer's line of sight. This was a salesperson that was holding the deal hostage. We talk a lot in Blue Sky about having key individuals and making sure that you secure a smooth sharing and transition of knowledge and relationships. This was one of those situations that is why we're so keen on this. This salesperson held 80% of the client relationships. Nobody else in the company knew these clients other than the sales rep. And consequently, the sales rep was accounting for about 70% of the revenue generated by the company. And when our buyer met this sales rep, he informed them that he was planning on leaving. He was planning on starting his own competing operation, and he was going to take his entire book of business with him. And his reason for wanting to do that was because he felt like he had been slighted by the existing owners, the sellers. As you can imagine, this threw a massive grenade in the middle of what was a very smooth due diligence process to this point, and threatened dramatically to absolutely destroy the deal, if not dramatically change the terms. This is among the more material findings that could come up in due diligence. So before I tell you the end of the story and what happened, let's talk about this whole hostage situation, gentlemen.
Yeah. Troy, any thoughts on that?
We preach all the time about having the continuity of your leadership team, and it sounds like this person was high up on the leadership team. We also talk and preach always about concentration and about one person having too much ownership of any one part of a business, because it does represent a significant risk. And so these things are things that Blue Sky has learned internally from lessons like these, and trying to come up with creative solutions to fix that. Ideally, we could have fixed this up front, but it sounds like the best possible outcome is what happened, because it sounds like the deal still survived.
It was mortally injured at this point.
Yes, it was. It sounds like the blood was flowing.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. The blood was flowing and the bloodletting was going on, for sure. This is, I think, a great example of why it is harmful for any business to have anyone be indispensable, which is not to say that we don't want executives and our team members to be incredibly talented. What I mean by indispensable is if they're holding secrets in the sort of way where no succession is possible, like think for a moment would have happened, even if this wasn't a sale situation, a situation where the business was sold, where this salesperson suddenly, God forbid, died. What would have happened to the business with the salesperson having a secret hold over the information about whatever it was, 70, 80% of the client relationships? This is not healthy for a business. Healthy businesses make sure that they've got massively competent, brilliant people in each role, and where each of those people are being transparent enough and documenting enough so that if the time does come when they're going to leave the company, or God forbid they should become ill and unable to perform, or even worse, die, that the ball could be picked up because the information is available. And this is really crucial in M&A situation, because whenever there is a sale of a business, there's always going to be a percentage of personnel who had been with the business that no longer want to stay with it after it's sold. That just happens. And hopefully it's not a lot of people. But if a business is sold and the people who aren't going to be staying on haven't already built out the training, the information that whoever is going to take their place is going to need to have in order to hit the ground running, that's not a good thing for a healthy business or for a healthy M&A transaction.
Absolutely. And if you think about this from the perspective of the business owners who were my client, who were selling, they were already under the thumb of this salesperson, right? Because it would have been easy had the salesperson not had the desire or opportunity to start their own competing business. They could have just gone to a competitor, gotten a really healthy signing bonus, and moved all of those clients. So the owners were already at the mercy of this salesperson by allowing them to be the only point of contact for customers, and by allowing them to excel in absentia. By that, I mean excel without bringing the rest of the team along. And so working on finding those rock stars and having them mentor and train their level of excellence and their procedures for excelling can bring the whole team along and strengthen everybody.
A long time ago in a previous business that I ran, I learned the hard way that you can't have one employee that can control your ship. I mean, you have to set boundaries, you have to set rules. And I love the idea of teaching the excellence that that person has to the rest of the team, because otherwise your business, once again, if they leave or something terrible happens, as a business owner, you're sitting there holding this bag and you may or may not know what to do with it and the right steps to take. So having multiple people that can do the same thing and you're not held hostage by anybody, something I've had to face that myself several times in the previous companies I've ran. You just can't allow that, even outside of an M&A transaction. An M&A transaction, it's almost a death knell. But even for your business, it's just not a good business practice at all.
Absolutely. And one last thing to say about this is that where I fell as an advisor, where I fell short for these clients, was that I did not earn their trust enough to get them to open up and go ugly early with me. Right. The advisory team is there to understand where all the skeletons are hidden, to identify these issues and help you mitigate them. Had all of this been brought up early, we could have resolved the situation with the salesperson well before going to market, and this never would have been an issue. And so on one side, on the business owner side, when you're looking at building an advisory team, don't bring on anybody you can't trust. And if your advisor's listening to this, recognize the fact that that trust has to be earned, and that until you earn their trust, you're never going to get your clients to open up, go ugly early, and give you the full opportunity to support them that they really need.
Yeah, in the scenario you've outlined, Jason, the chances of really earning that earnout, 30% of the value of the transaction, is greatly diminished.
Yeah. If that salesperson did quit after the deal, there's no business left. So they'd be left with 20%-ish of their revenue and have to build back up. So yeah, the ability to support the debt of the acquisition for the bank and for the seller who's carrying that 30% note was absolutely crippled or potentially crippled. Are we ready to resolve this one?
That's what I was about to ask too. Troy, are you good with us moving on to the next horror story?
Absolutely.
Okay. So
all right.
We've solved the kidnapping in the Midwest, and now we're going to move on to, is your ship sinking?
We didn't solve it yet. I got to give you the solution.
The solution. Oh my gosh. Jumping the gun. Go ahead.
So what we ended up doing, and at the end of the day, this ended up costing my clients a ton of potential money, because what we ended up doing was creating a structure where the salesperson got a substantial stay bonus for signing a contract to commit to stay for 2 years. That was phase one. But the buyer still felt like he was being fed a quote unquote shit sandwich. And so we had to make them whole too. And the only way that we could do that and get this deal across the finish line was for the sellers to give up an additional 30% of their cash at closing of the total transaction value. Only this time it wasn't in the form of a seller's note. It was in the form of an earnout. So not only did the company have to be able to cash flow the debt liability, but they had to achieve metrics that were as good, if not better, than the historical performance that this business was valued against in order to receive the full allotment of their money. And so this put a tremendous amount of the risk on the laps of the sellers, not to mention the additional cash that they lost in paying out this stay bonus to the salesperson. So we got the deal done, but it became very expensive for my clients.
Yeah. Thank you for the punchline. I forgot about that. Excellent. So now we'll move on to, is your ship sinking? Troy, here's your horror story.
It was a salty day on the seas, my friends. The seers were fierce. So this was a great deal. The owner had gotten everything they'd wanted. There was two guys. There was a financial owner partner that was backing the owner, and then there was the owner that ran the day-to-day operations. This is a great deal. This owner had always wanted to give his employees equity in the company. We had arranged for that in the sale. He was maximizing the real estate value and the business value at the sale. In the ninth hour, we learned that the buyer's representative for the debt portion of the deal, the broker had suffered personal problems with his family. And so information wasn't going back and forth between the broker and the bank. And so we had a get-together meeting with everybody. And the day-to-day operator looked at the banker and said, "Hey, are you going to get this deal done in 30 days? And the banker's like, "I can't get it done in 30 days. We've still got to go through the SBA process, but we can get this done in 45 to 60 days. That's my commitment." And the guy just had a vein right here in the middle of his forehead. His face went completely red. He goes, "That's it. I'm out. This deal is done." And he walked out of the negotiation. The financial guy was still sitting there. We talked for quite a while. Finally was able to talk some sense into his partner. And we're all just sitting there holding the bag. And the guy was like, "Well, I'll go talk to him and see if we can't put this back together." So the deal was really dead at that point in time. I got a call around 5 o'clock at night, and it was the financial backer, right? Calls me up and he says, "Hey, can you come down to the office? I'm sitting here talking and we need to talk with you about this deal." And so we go down there, and I go down there, and the day-to-day operator had literally gone to his office and probably sat there and cried the entire afternoon. I mean, I could just clearly see the emotional drain on this gentleman. And it led us to believing that we needed to bring in Dr. David Gruder to our team to help us work with these buyers. We were actually able to talk common sense into him. He did go through with the deal, but valuable lessons were learned. And this wasn't a hostage deal or anything like that, but it was an emotional struggle. It was an emotional turmoil. And so at the end of the day, it did close. The employees got a 10% ownership in the deal. The guy was cashed out, thank God, because a month after he found out that he closed the deal, he found out he had a massive brain tumor and could spend the time now focusing on his health and getting back to being a healthy man again.
It's like 6 nightmares rolled up in one.
Right? Literally.
I told you it gets scary.
Didn't even know it.
Yeah. We bring Troy on board and it gets scary fast.
Yeah. Well, one of the many things that this story illuminates is how inevitably strong emotions are going to come up around the sale and acquisition of a business. They can't not come up because people who have invested years, often decades, in birthing a baby, in this case, the baby being the business, and growing it up and putting in their blood, sweat, and tears and heart and soul into the business's success, the almost inevitable result of that is that owners end up building their sense of self around the business and separating from a business, even if the opportunity to sell is really, really lucrative, still has a high chance of being really, really traumatic because the owner won't know who they are after the business is sold unless they're working with someone who can help them craft such an exciting next life chapter that they won't undermine the sale of the business unintentionally.
Yeah. And, the other thing that I really like about this story, as nightmarish as it is we do talk a lot about this ego separation between the owner and the business and the creation of an identity and a life plan separate from the business for the owner. But what this story really highlights that we don't talk enough about, I think, is that emotional attachment to the staff as family. And you can see that this financing and backing delay in this is not just frustrating the owner because he has to own the business longer, but it's also frustrating the owner because of this undercurrent of, I made this promise to my staff that they were going to get some money. And now I have to go back and explain to them that I misspoke, and that money, that bonus check, if you will, for them is delayed. And that secondary emotional consideration of, just like I identify with the business as an extension of myself, many times business owners also subsequently identify with the staff as an extension of their family. And so this is emotional on a lot of different levels.
Oh, I've heard many times from many different business owners how they want to take care of their employees, and it's almost exclusive of the money they're going to earn at the closing. Like, it's almost a secondary motivation, the money is, and taking care of their employees. I don't know how many times I've heard it, is key in their thought process about what they're doing. And when I run into those scenarios, it just reminds me of this story and the need for, once again, that plan afterwards, a solid path forward during the M&A transaction, knowing where things are at any point in time, because that was the other double whammy, right? Nobody knew about the guy and what he was not doing or doing incorrectly. And so it was all ninth hour, and I could see, where he thought he had been bamboozled, he had been lied to, and he had at many levels, to be honest with you, but it was a lie of attrition, really, because nobody knew about it until we dug into it to find out what was going on.
Really redundant and common points that almost every investment banker will resonate with, which is, one, there is almost always some element of a dead zone in communication during due diligence. And it's really paramount that the advisory team identify. It's funny because it's hard to notice the sounds that aren't happening, right? But keeping a keen eye on where is it quiet in this due diligence process, because that's where you have to spend just as much attention as where it's loud and hostile, right? And so it brings up that really great point, and I appreciate this story for highlighting all of these things.
That's so spot on.
I agree with that. And, we were purposely withheld from actually talking to the broker by the buyers. They wanted to keep their information really close to the vest. And hindsight, I was blindsided by it, but I should have been out in front of it as the advisor way more proactively than what I was. And so when you're left sitting there looking at all the dominoes falling over on the table, it's like, all right, which one of these do we got to pick up? How do we get the stack put back in place and move forward with this deal?
Yeah. And I think this is where the kidnapping story and the sinking ship story kind of start to overlap, is that whenever a member of the transaction is getting coy, is getting secretive, is highlighting something they don't want to talk about or address, that's when there's something underneath that we really need to understand. For me, and in the kidnapping story, it was they didn't want the buyer to meet the staff. They didn't want to have any staff introductions. They didn't want any of that until after closing.
Right.
Big red flag. And in your case, Troy, it's the buyer wants to keep everything close to the vest, and there's nobody on the seller's team that they'll provide access to. That's another scary issue.
Very scary. And in fact, the only way I really got to the bottom of that is I went and camped out at the actual banker's office until I got to the bottom of what was going on. And that's when we could make real headway.
Yeah. Any other things that either of you want to say about the lessons from this or the outcome?
I think the big thing here is establishing that trust and rapport, not only with the seller and the buyer, but with the advisory teams that is working on the deal. We have to have those open lines of communications. And we've taken steps at Blue Sky to make sure we're on top of that. We try to collect this information up front as we start our initial process. And anybody as an investment banker that isn't doing that is setting themselves up for a scenario exactly like this down the road.
Beautifully said. Well, we're going to switch gears now with a next story, which is, instead of the lethal impacts of withholding information, this story is called Lethal Advice. So the lethal impacts of bad advice. So take it away, Jason.
Man, and I'll tell you what, I don't think Troy could have set me up any better with his segue. So this is a perfect follow-on story. So this is a story about not having the trust and input and inclusion of the full advisory team. And this is one where I missed a key advisor in the deal process. And by failing to include that advisor, I opened up the door for him to circumvent the entire deal team and talk directly to the business owner who was my client, who was selling his business, and talk him out of the deal. In this case, we had a banker, the banking institution and the business banker that represented this particular business for 2 generations. We have a seller who is motivated to sell because he has health issues, but was talked completely out of the deal by the banker playing on his emotions and telling him that he was being a fool and that he was being taken advantage of by myself and the advisory team, who were, in his estimation, just chasing a success fee and not looking out for his interests. And this banker was so well trusted by my business owner and by his father, who was still alive and remembered the beginnings of their banking relationship, that I lost every opportunity to even come back and discuss the concerns and address the allegations that were made against our team. And this deal blew up exactly 1 week before the closing date. And in this case, it was a banker, but most of my life, it's been the attorney. A couple times it's been the accountant. 2 or 3 times it's been a financial advisor. There is often going to be an advisor that's more trusted and that has a longer history with the business owner than a transaction advisor does. And if they're not being heard, and if the transaction advisor doesn't understand and have a plan to address the concerns that they carry about a transaction, you're setting yourself up for rot within the process and an extraordinarily high risk of the explosion or implosion of a deal.
It's reminding me of all the stories that can go that way. And there's a bunch that happened just like that, where one person on the advisory team, I'm thinking specifically of a buy-side deal we were working, the accountant came in and disagreed with our valuation of what the target company was. And I completely ignored the signals that the buyer really wasn't comfortable with the business. And so when we argued that the business was worth more money, we were going to insult the seller by taking an offer this low to them. The whole deal blew up, but it really was one advisor that carried more weight than everybody else at the table. And the seller wanted to get a deal, so he wanted that lower price to start out with. And so bad advice is lethal, and that deal never happened. And I hope we were able to salvage the relationship with the seller, but I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, you bring up such an exceptional point, Troy. The bad advice that kills deals almost always plays into the desire or the insecurity of our client, right? In my case, this was a guy who was in a small town and he had his reputation and everything, and he didn't want to be taken for a fool. And the banker was able to play on that fear of being taken advantage of and change his mind about the entire transaction. And in your case, it was this desire to get a good deal and the worry that our recommendation of a higher price was recommending that he leave money on the table rather than the target, which played into their emotions.
That's exactly right.
Right. Well, I think this is a story that really goes to a couple of really key pieces having to do with advisors who aren't adhering to the fiduciary standard in working with their clients, where they're making their own self-interest or their own agenda more important than their clients' highest interests. And that what often accompanies that lack of fiduciary standard is this kind of back channel, self-serving advice, the giving private input to the seller or the buyer outside of the conversation among all of the advisors and especially the transaction facilitator that undermines the M&A process. We see this kind of backstabbing, gossiping power play throughout society. We see it in politics, we see it in families. So it should be no surprise that it shows up in businesses as well. To not be aware that it can show up and to not take steps to minimize the chances that it will happen is a really big mistake.
Yeah, I got to back you up for a minute, Doctor, because normally you and I are pretty much on the same page and we pretty regularly agree with one another.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really struggling with this idea. Are you telling me that there's backstabbing and deceit in politics?
Oh my gosh.
Where did that come from?
That
My
doesn't even
mistake.
That doesn't seem possible. You never see that on the news or hear about that anywhere, do you? That doesn't happen.
That's totally left field, Doctor. I'm going to have to retract that one.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected. Not. Okay. Are we done with that third story?
I think we are. That one's dead.
That one is dead. Lethal advice killed it. So on to the final story, which is called Burnt at the Table. The subtitle would be Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire. Take it away, Troy.
Yeah, so I was working with a gentleman, and he was the third generation owner of a company that was over 100 years old. And when I met him, I realized that there was third generation, and I knew he had family. And I'm like, well, isn't one of your children teed up to take over this business? And he was like, no. He goes, they all want to do their own things. They've got families. They're in their 40s. None of them have ever showed any interest in it. And so I took him at his word on that. We worked through the deal. I worked diligently for almost 9 months, 10 months before I got him a full price offer on what we agreed was the value of his company. And he started getting cold feet as this LOI was produced and as all the documentation was produced. And he called me up one day and he told me, he goes, well, I don't really have faith that they're going to be able to get the deal done. And he goes, and I don't really know that I'm ready to sell my business yet. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I said, I can assure you, I've seen financials. I've talked to the banker. The banker is in line for this deal. Everything's done. I mean, all of the T's have been crossed. The I's are dotted. This deal is ready to go. It's a fair deal. It's more than a fair deal. We're getting the value that you wanted, that we agreed upon up front. And he just told me, he goes, Troy, at the end of the day, he goes, I can't do this deal. I'm not going to do this deal. So the deal went south. I thought about all the missteps that I had taken perhaps and what I could have done differently. And then I was down there and I was doing something. It was a meat processing plant. I was picking up some steaks. And there was a new gal in the office there. And I introduced myself and she introduced myself to herself to me as the daughter. And I'm like, oh, I said, great. You're working in your dad's business. She goes, oh, no, I'm running the business now. I'm like, well, that could have been really helpful information right up front because we could have organized and structured the deal and set it up and sold it to her instead, right? But this on purpose didn't tell me what was going on. I don't know how to get around that scenario at all. That one still haunts me to this day. I don't know how to go about that. Blue sky, we were into this deal 9 months and we were contingency on success fees at that point. And our deals are always contingent upon success fees, right? And I had spent 9 months doing this. And so I had to come home and have a really unpleasant conversation with my wife about this and figure out a better path forward for Blue Sky and then try to figure out the lessons learned on this deal. And when you get right down to it, people are motivated by their self-interest, their own self-interests. And they're always more motivated about family. And if he'd have been honest with me about his daughter coming back into the picture, we could have worked out a deal.
Well, this is an interesting one, right? Because we see very frequently two things that this brings up in my mind that get me in the cold sweats at night. One is that for whatever reason, business owners don't like to pay advisors. And they feel like an advisor getting money from them in some way stealing, which, doctor, you could probably talk about the psychology of this because I'm not sure how to deal with that. But the other one is that they also have a different perception of what selling their business for a success fee looks like, right? If they sell to an outside party, it's obvious, right? We facilitated that introduction and we then should get paid for it, right? But once they're selling to a family member or they're selling to their management team, if it's something internal, then all of a sudden they don't think of that as a sale that deserves a fee in the way that they would with an external party. And many times they get bad structures and get bad deals because they want to cut out the advisor when they need them the most to try to avoid this fee.
Well, you're illuminating something about, in the broader sense, how many businesses are reluctant to invest in training in soft skills, right? They'll invest in machinery, technology, better sources of ingredients if they're selling products, things like that. But there's this kind of second-class citizenship mentality around advisors and people skills and things like that. And it's kind of, in a sense, it's the opposite of what it needs to be, because in the end, it's the people and the relationships and the collaboration and the productivity that make a business far more than what the business is selling. So this reluctance to invest in advisors, I think, is partly related to the second-class citizenship of soft skills, but it's also partly related to one of the reasons why that's the case, which is that a lot of business owners have never been taught, have never learned how to select high-quality advisors, how to select high-quality personnel development programs. And if they don't know how to select those resources well, then they're going to be gun-shy for really understandable reasons.
Yeah, and you bring up a really great point about selection, right? Because there are bad actors out there. There are people out there in the world providing services that justify business owners' wariness of our advisory professions. So on one hand, we're fighting ourselves in this battle. But on the other hand, like you mentioned, if they are competent in recognizing their need and selecting a good team, going back to that whole only hire advisors you can trust and have advisors that are willing to earn that trust. So getting the awareness to be able to differentiate the bad actors from the good by the fruits of their labor, there's an opportunity to bridge this gap.
It ties into the last story too, right? With lethal advice and not having advisors around you that are pointing bad advice. There's one other point that's missing or that hasn't been talked about here, which is the risk that the dad assumed with the daughter. Because he had told me stories about his daughter and financial struggles that she was having, which is why he didn't think she was a good candidate to start out with, which means he's also left hold the financial bag. So there really wasn't the peace of mind to go sit on his boat and enjoy the sunsets with his wife, because he's still got revenue and income and family values, family pride on the line. This is a 120-year-old company, right? And he's handed it to a person who really doesn't have the financial wherewithal to withstand any storm, which means he's backing that 100% until forever, really.
Yeah. And how many times do you hear that in an M&A transaction when you get brought into it and you say, why aren't you thinking about selling to your family? The immediate answer at that point, when the pressure's not on, is, I don't trust that they can run this company.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, over time, they get worn down. When they get emotional about truly letting go, they're like, well, I don't have to fully let go if I give it to my kid. And all of a sudden, they start talking themselves out of the rational decision that they made when they hired an intermediary.
Yeah. We have one of our friends in Colorado, and he did exactly the same thing, right? At the ninth hour, he handed it down to his son. And I don't know how many conversations we had with him about not really trusting that his son could do it. And we had met the gentleman many times. He was a creative guy. He was smart, but I don't know that he had the wherewithal to really run a business. I think he'd make a hell of a salesperson for anybody, but running a company is a whole different stretch.
I'm thinking right now about a family-owned business that I was a consultant to quite a few years ago. And these two brothers owned the business that they had gotten from their father. And they were ideally wanting to have a succession plan so that their children could own the business. But they had massive reservations about whether their children had the passion, the chops, and the willingness to learn that would be necessary in order for the business to continue to thrive. And it was only through exposing all of those secrets in a transparent and helpful way that it was able to become clear which of the children actually had the desire to take on the business, to continue the business themselves, and had the commitment to developing their own capabilities to the point where they could do that well. And it was not until that became really clear, because all the don't talk rules were broken, that the two brothers reached a point where they felt settled and comfortable and trusting that this succession plan that they wanted to happen could actually happen in a good way.
Yeah, those stories can go on and on forever. I mean, I've got a million thoughts running through my head right now about scenarios I could bring up. But at the end of the day, you do have to have those open conversations. You have to figure out what is best for the company, what is best for the family. And then that relationship amongst the family has to continuously be managed, or jealousy could creep in and somebody thinks somebody's getting treated more favorably than the rest of the family. And then that could lead to the demise of the business as well, David. And that's where you come into play in spades.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I think is really precious about Blue Sky's approach is that Blue Sky understands that one of the advisory teams among all of the advisory teams that are necessary when succession or exit is being looked at in whatever form it's being looked at is the family becomes an advisory team as well, so that these hidden things can get exposed. And when you were talking earlier, Troy, about not being sure what the remedy is, that's really the remedy. The family needs to be its own advisory team.
And that puts them squarely in the Gruder zone.
In the Grood.
The Gruder zone. Okay, talk about Twilight Zones. Right. Anything else you want to say before we move on to sharing our takeaways and wrapping up the episode?
Covered a lot of ground here.
Well, yes. And Troy, it's been such a pleasure having you with us on this episode. Do you want to lead off with what the key takeaways are that you're wanting our viewers and listeners to take away from this episode?
I would think if you want to keep the nightmares out of your M&A transaction, you really need to be open, honest, transparent with your advisory team about all of your goals, right? And the more open and honest you are with everybody, the better we are all equipped to help you. And it needs to be advice that's not offered in silos. It needs to be the entire advisory team working together. I think as long as that happens, and on both sides, I mean, I know that in deals, there's information that has to be kept siloed between buyers and sellers. But at some point in time, you have to come together and you have to work together for the transaction in order to get the transaction done.
Brilliant. To establish trust and full inclusion among all advisors, not only the transparency between the seller and the buyer.
Yeah, and that leads me right into what I was thinking, because I was going to say the same thing. It's all about trust, right? But this trust dynamic is bigger than we ever appreciate it to be, right? For a business owner, for a potential client, that client has to build a team that they feel like they can trust. But then every member of that team has to be committed to earning that trust every day and to building the trust and respect amongst themselves as peers, so that they are all moving in the same direction to provide the best possible guidance for their mutual client. And then the last piece on this whole trust thing is that if you are putting yourself as an advisor in that coach role, especially if you're the transaction intermediary in an M&A transaction, you have one extra responsibility beyond the trust, which is for everybody knows to listen to what is said and what is happening. But it's just as important to pay attention. And I think every single one of these stories in their own way allude to failures occurring because of a lack of attention to what's not being said and what's not happening. And so you listen for the noise and you listen for the quiet and you let everybody else deal with what's in the middle in a lot of ways and just facilitate that piece. Because
if you don't, you end up in the horror movie Night of the Living Dead.
Exactly.
Hopefully your boat doesn't sink.
Right.
While the table's on fire.
Right.
I'll offer my takeaways and then turn it over to you, Jason, to wrap this up. So one of the takeaways for me is that indispensability kills businesses and M&A. It's never too soon for each team member to be mindful about succession planning long before exit is even being executed or implemented. So that to me is a really important takeaway. Another is there's an old saying in 12-step programs like in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're only as sick as our secrets. Well, the same is true in businesses. M&A is only as sick as its secrets. Always be transparent about your skeletons if you're a business owner. With your M&A advisors, go, as you said, Jason, it's a perfect soundbite from this episode earlier on. You said, go ugly early. Vital, just as vital. I mean, think about it at the level of real estate transaction. If a seller does not disclose a defect in a house and the sale goes through and there's been withholding about that defect, the buyer can take really has pathways for devastating recourse against the seller. Well, this is no different. That we are as sick as our secrets, and sellers really need to appreciate that every skeleton in the closet, no matter how big or small they think it might be, needs to be disclosed to the transaction advisor so that decisions in an open-eyed way can be made about what to repair so it doesn't need to be disclosed because it's been repaired, what needs to be disclosed because it's not yet been repaired, and how to disclose it in a good way that's not going to cause a deal to go south. The third is what I was talking about earlier about this kind of back channeling of self-serving advice by non-fiduciary advisors that will every day of the week undermine sellers, buyers, and the M&A process. And lastly, as just to put a fine point on it, as I said earlier, always include family members as a part of your advisory teams. Your family is one of the advisory teams.
Awesome. Well said.
Very well said. Clawbacks are real, my friend.
Yeah, and they're painful.
For sure.
Well, with all of that said, I just want you all to know it's only 104 more episodes until our next Nightmare Stories. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you had as much fun as we did. And I hope this was enlightening for you, whether you're a business owner, a business member, or an advisor. And on behalf of our special guest, Troy Tucker, Dr. David Gruder, and myself, thank you so much for taking part in this episode. We'd love to have you click the subscribe button to help us get in front of more people. We'd also very interested in hearing your comments and feedbacks in the comment section below. And if you want more information about Blue Sky Business Resources or about utilizing our tools, even the free tools, the micro surveys that we have available to you, hit up our website at blueskyadvisors.net. You can find our podcast there. You can find free survey tools to give you strategic guidance throughout your business. And you can learn more about our team and find an advisor that can help you out today. So we look forward to speaking at you again in the very near future. Thanks so much and have a great day.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.